Thank you, Alex and Sarah, for joining us. I'm really excited about this conversation. Alex and Sarah both have new books about, in one way or another, the companies that are increasingly dominating our lives and that we need so badly to understand and that we spend a lot of time talking about here at Techonomy. Sarah's book, No Filter, is an unbelievably thorough account of Instagram's history, which ends up talking a lot about Facebook, which is a company she covers at Bloomberg News, along with Twitter, TikTok, and some other companies. But it's a terrific book. Alex's book, Always Day One, another superb book with a much broader remit. Alex's book is really a look at the biggest tech companies, I guess the 5 major ones, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft, with an eye to understanding how the way they function could be a lesson for all companies as we move into a fundamentally altered economy. The stories he tells about each company are quite amazing. He also is the main Facebook person at BuzzFeed and covers other tech giants as well. I think maybe the way to start, I want to start, I guess I'll start with Sarah. I wanted to ask you, you know, your book ends up being kind of almost shocking tale of, I'm not quite sure I'd call it decline, but it's a story of sort of the betrayal of a dream almost. And I wonder, when you embarked on this book, is that the book that you thought you'd end up writing? And do you agree with my basic characterization also?
Instagram story, all I knew was that there was so much to uncover. I looked back at my proposal the other day just to see what I was thinking. And at the time, I mean, I was considered already one of the top people who knew about Instagram as a business, but I felt like there was so much that I didn't understand about how the company operated as a company within Facebook after the 2012 acquisition, because we had all heard as journalists that it was just this happy marriage, that there was this you know, an independence that they had, that Kevin Systrom basically considered Zuckerberg a board member. And so when I went into it, I honestly wasn't sure what I would find. I didn't realize the extent of the tension between Instagram and Facebook until about a couple weeks into my reporting, just before the founders left. I was thinking what would happen if during this book process they were to quit. I mean, something's going to happen. And then it happened like a week after I started asking my editor that question. So I thought maybe this book is going to be about the future of Facebook. Maybe it's going to be that Instagram is Facebook 2.0, learning the lessons of what Facebook did wrong and trying to do them better. What I found was very different.
Well, interestingly, one of the things that it becomes, in effect, is the story of Facebook 2.0, since you account for, and I think as we talked about yesterday on the phone, it's even maybe become more true since you finished the book, that Instagram is basically just becoming like Facebook more and more with every passing day. Is that an exaggeration?
No, you're right. It used to be that Instagram was a very differently organized. I mean, it still is very different. You have a follower model as opposed to a friend model. So, you know, you're not mutually connected to everyone that you are connected to on Instagram. You have anonymity on Instagram. You have a lot of people with multiple accounts. Things are organized by hashtag. Things don't go viral on Instagram. And now that Facebook has taken over more, you're seeing more of a recommendation algorithm, more personalization on Instagram, and certainly more notifications and more directions to Instagram users to go over to Facebook. So it is becoming a way to funnel people into the main property, or at least what Facebook wants to be the main property.
Yeah, I want to get back to some of those issues, which I know Alex knows a lot about also. But I guess I've just left, if the founders left right after you started on the book, to some extent that was a gift to you, because clearly your access to the founders was extraordinary, and it really is to a large extent their story. which they obviously wanted to tell and wanted you to tell, and you did a spectacularly good job doing so. But I bet your access was radically better because of that.
Well, I think anytime, you don't have a PR person in the room, you're going to get a better story. And I feel like that there has to be a balance, right? Like I did talk to a couple dozen people through Facebook that they, sort of gave their blessing to talk to. And then the vast majority of people that I talked to for the book, founders included, did so without any sort of direction from the company. And I think you need both. I think you need to have a sense of like, okay, is this accurate? Does this person have an axe to grind? But you also need the context, like what was their emotion in this moment? Like what was their motivation in this moment? And a lot of those things you can't as easily get from someone who's been media trained.
Yeah, right. I couldn't agree more. So Alex, the thing that your book seems like what motivated you to write the book, and tell me if this is right, is that you kind of had this revelation that this thing you call the engineer's mindset was the determining sort of differentiator between the giant tech companies and most other companies. And you seem to have set out to explain what are the elements of that anybody could learn from, and how has it allowed these companies to become so dominant? Is that a fair appraisal?
Yeah, so I came to the book because having reported on the tech giants, I had a picture of how they worked on the inside. And by seeing that, I really felt that the way that we work is going to change and the way that we lead companies is going to change, at least for those that remain alive. And the tech giants have had a head start on this, which is why they've been able to lap the economy. So for me, it was important to take their methods and be able to share it with everyone else. And, thinking about the way that we work, like I come from a bit of an untraditional background for a tech reporter. My degree is in industrial and labor relations. So the whole study was in organizational behavior, human resources, how employees are motivated. And to me, it's just completely different. The way that we work now is completely different from the systems that were set up for the modern workplace. So, so the engineer's mindset is the way that I describe it in the book is these CEOs have created systems inside their organization to take ideas from wherever they may exist inside the company, lowest rung on the totem pole, doesn't matter what division. And most traditional companies do whatever they can to build barriers to make sure those ideas don't get to decision makers. And I think what the tech giants have done really well is take down the barriers and create cultures that allow for democratic invention, which is the case inside Amazon, and feedback, which is the case inside Facebook, and collaboration, which is the case inside Google, to make sure those barriers are broken down. But I think that those are really only effective if a company looks at work completely differently than it did before. And I think there's like two different types of work. One is, idea work, which is anything that's involved in coming up with a new idea and bringing it to life. And the other type of work is execution work, which is anything that's involved in supporting an existing product. And so what the tech giants have done really well is they've used technology to minimize execution work and make room for idea work. So the systems that they have to take ideas to decision makers are actually effective.
Well, yeah, I do think that your background studying labor relations and management's interaction with its workers really infuses the book with a sort of very savvy and unique mindset and you talk about going back to Cornell and talking to your former professors about how do they interpret what's going on in the modern workplace with these companies' dominance. It's really well done. One of the things that I want to quickly touch on, though, you really make some stark contrast between these companies. And I would say, coming out of the book, I would say you are incredibly gung-ho and optimistic about the potential and the longevity of Amazon and Microsoft. You have some serious questions, even though clearly dominance remains, for Facebook and Google, and you are quite pessimistic about Apple under its current leadership and management style. Pessimistic to a degree I found very surprising. Just quickly take us through that quintet of companies and tell us why you came to those conclusions? I know that's a lot to say in a quick
Yeah.
moment, but
I
try.
can do it fast. No problem. So yeah, and like the subtitle of the book is how how the tech titans plan to stay on top forever, not how they will stay on top forever. So I think they're all vulnerable in their own way, but I think the rest of the economy needs to be able to catch up. So to the way that they work. So the book's title is called Always Day One. And so what's the purpose of having ideas come to decision makers and making more time for employees to come up with ideas? It's to make sure that you can keep reinventing yourself. And anytime there's a moment where a computing shift happens, which happens a lot, you're ready for it. And so that's sort of like the overriding through line through the book, right? And we know that companies are not very good at doing this today. The average company on the Fortune 500 would last for like 70 years in the 1920s. Today, it's 15 years. And that's because companies just don't have the ability to adjust. We can go through the list of GE, Xerox, Kodak, the whole, these stories are well known. Okay, with that wind up. So Amazon, I think, has the best process to enable itself to invent. They are so good at churning out new products and services that people actually use. And it's all cultural. The culture underneath this stuff really matters. And that's why they've been able to go from an online bookstore to a clearinghouse about every product that you would want on the internet, to a massive third-party marketplace, a logistics and fulfillment company, cloud services operation, hardware manufacturer, voice
Amazing range
platform.
of things.
Yeah, not to mention an Academy Award-winning movie studio and a grocer, right? So if there's a trend that's going to come up to defeat Amazon, I'm pretty confident they'll be able to adjust and make it happen. Facebook and Google have been pretty good at reinventing themselves. Facebook has reinvented itself from an online directory to a broadcast platform where anybody on the internet could, put something out to everybody they've met in their life. And now it's reinventing again to a series of smaller networks and groups, an intimate messaging type of communication facilitator. So they've done well on that, and I think they also their culture has holes in it. Because they've been neglectful of things that could sort of like their broader responsibility to society. I think that's something that you've highlighted well, Sarah, as well. And so I think that it's no secret that Facebook is going to need to navigate this stuff if it's going to remain, keep trust with people and remain in the place that it is. Google, I think Google's probably in pretty good shape. The reinventions that Google's gone through are unbelievable. They were initially a website, then they went to, they became actually a browser extension, like the Google toolbar. Not many people realize this, but more than 60% of Google search went through the Google toolbar, which is a browser extension they built for Microsoft's Internet Explorer. Then they became a browser when relying on Microsoft was no longer going to be a good strategy. Then they became this mobile operating system with Android, and they're reinventing again to a voice assistant. And they're able to do this because they can collaborate really well. So think about the voice assistant. How many different divisions do you pull in? You have Android and Maps and Mail and your calendar and search. And these divisions need to be able to speak with each other. So Google's been really good at facilitating collaboration. The reason why I'm a little equivocal about it is because the management has been trying to rein in some of the parts of the collaboration culture they have to make sure that the employees don't protest too much. And I think that they're going to need to return Google to the more collaborative version of old if that stuff's going to persist. So, but I still think Google's in pretty good shape. Microsoft, obviously, the bets that Satya Nadella has made when it's returned that company to a day one mentality, right? Like they were definitely in this sort of milk the asset, let's ride Windows to the death under Ballmer. And Satya Nadella is basically like, we're not going to make our bones on a desktop operating system in the age of mobile and cloud. And so he started investing in collaboration software and cloud services, which actually happen to be the two things we need right now that we're all stuck at home. So Microsoft's in good shape. Okay, now Apple. It's tough to say it in the lightning round, but I'll just say that their culture has so many silos and is so filled with secrecy that it's really good at refining its current products. So the iPhone, for instance, just keeps getting thinner and smaller and faster, and the battery lasts longer. They're very good at doing that. But because they don't talk to each other, they're not good at reinventing or finding ways to get into the next era of computing. And you just take voice computing, for an example. Google, like I just said, very good at collaborating and building the Google Assistant, which is making headway against Alexa. And Apple had a 6-year head start on this with Siri. So why haven't they been able to do it? Is it that they're bad at technology? Definitely not the case. It's totally cultural. The divisions can't speak with each other. They don't know how to integrate. They viewed Siri as an iPhone feature, not as a voice computing platform, because they're so stuck on the iPhone. And as long as they keep milking that asset and not looking broader, not looking how that they transform, they'll have a good flagship product, which will last you, again, maybe about 15 years, but they won't be able to make it through to the next reinvention. So that's why I'm kind of skeptical about Apple's culture.
You draw an amazing contrast to the way that Google Assistant was developed and the way that Siri was developed, and how at Google they realized the Assistant had to basically incorporate a pathway to all the different products Google had, so everybody talked to each other, and it came out really well. Whereas at Siri, they really didn't realize that and didn't build it that way, and as a result, as we all know, it doesn't do nearly as much stuff. So,
yeah, David, I wish that people could hear how, I mean, it doesn't come through in the text. I mean, I try to do it as much as I could, but I wish people could be on the phone calls with me, with Siri developers and Apple machine learning developers and people on that original team, to hear how dejected they were. Because, you know, generally when you interview people that are in tech, they come off as pretty optimistic and happy. And these people were depressed. So it sort of just gives a sense.
Well, you know, that makes me change the next question I was going to ask to Sarah, because I want to get you both talking to each other about Facebook more. But Sarah, you know, I would imagine, you know, you spent a lot of time talking to the original employees of Instagram, and its corporate history was compressed into a surprisingly short time frame, especially as an independent company, since it sold to Facebook for $1 billion. What was it, 15 months old at the time?
18
something
months,
like that.
Yeah,
it was very young. Did you find a kind of mood of dejection among a lot of your sources also?
Oh, absolutely. I think so many of the people who left Instagram did it with a lot of heartbreak, and look at what it's become. And, you know, at different stages, right? And there's the hipster artisan early employee who hates how commercialized it's become. There's the person who really tried to preserve the Instagram design aesthetic in a Facebook environment and wasn't able to do that. And then there's the people who, at the very end, when the founders are fighting to maintain Instagram's independence, and who are, you know, advocating for more head count, for
we're getting a little bit of
Facebook.
interference there. Advocating for more
sorry.
headcount. What was the next thing after that?
Yeah. When people were trying to fix Instagram's problems before they could become Facebook sized and, you know, this have a global reckoning a la Facebook, they were asking for more, and they were thinking about Instagram as the future of Facebook, and they were getting blocked. And that, I think, was very depressing, because they were looking at it and saying, you know, our data shows that we need to solve this problem. We don't have the headcount to do it. We're not doing it in a way that's proactive. And they just felt cut off from Instagram's potential, which they thought was not a good business decision.
It's interesting. And one of the sort of more shocking things in your book, and there actually are quite a few shocking details, was that when Instagram finally got to 1 billion users, which wasn't very long ago, rather than celebrating that inside Facebook as a company and saying, okay, let's double down and let's make this thing really grow to be the next Facebook, because let's, you know, eat our own young and do all the things that Alex says companies needs to do to have a day one mentality. Instead, they pulled resources back. They said, no, we're going to put resources on Facebook. And Zuckerberg personally was threatened, clearly, by that success that Instagram had, which leads me to this next question for both of you, because Alex, one of the things Alex says in quite passionately and accurately, I think, in many ways about Facebook, is that this feedback culture is one of its defining characteristics. That Zuckerberg, in general, has built a culture where if you have a disagreement, you're encouraged to bring it to your manager, your coworkers, all the way up the food chain as necessary, etc. And yet, we see that Facebook has failed to incorporate any kind of legitimate or societally responsible response to a whole kind of set of questions that have been asked of them over time that they have, really just not reacted well to. I think any of us would agree with that. I know both of you do agree with that. How can we say, well, let me ask Sarah to start. Do you think Facebook has a feedback mindset?
I think the biggest problem is how they measure success. Because if you are going through this kind of feedback system and you're rewarding people for building things that make the data better, and all of your sort of debates that you have internally are resolved by data and feedback, the goal is still growth. It's still to build something that more people want to use. And the blind spot that creates is the problems. And if we were to define success differently, we were to say, what we are going towards is being good stewards of our, now 3 billion people who use Facebook. What we are going towards is something that might be hard to measure, but we should measure it and we should figure it out. I think that would be a lot healthier. And I think when it came to Instagram versus Facebook, it was clear that the data was not a answer. Basically, it ended up being an emotional decision. Zuckerberg comes out and tells all of his employees, we must disrupt ourselves. Domination, like we have to have, like Alex says, an always say one mentality. He says in the orientation packet for employees, internet products don't get the luxury of leaving ruins. They disappear. Like we need to kill ourselves before someone else kills us. And that was not what he applied to the Instagram question. When the data comes back, Zuckerberg sees, of course they analyze whether Instagram is a threat to Facebook, and the data comes back and Zuckerberg reads it very differently than Kevin Systrom does. Zuckerberg sees a waning of Facebook's audience over time, which he doesn't like to see. And Kevin sees a growing of the overall pie. So what is he working towards? The longevity of Facebook, the social network, or the longevity of Facebook Inc.? And I think that in determining, how we measure success and what we're actually trying to goal towards, it shouldn't just be growth. It shouldn't just be, longevity of the business. There has to be some broader component of success.
Yeah. And Alex, you and I talked about, there was a very interesting Wall Street Journal piece this week about Facebook's board and how since the beginning of 2019, it has turned over with every single member except Zuckerberg, Sandberg, Mark Andreessen, and Peter Thiel, who have been on it forever and are obviously insider allies of Zuckerberg. And there have been tremendous dissent on the board. And instead of responding to it and taking that feedback, so to speak, Zuckerberg has pushed out those board members. So how do you interpret that in the feedback culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to quickly weigh in on the Instagram thing, and I'm kind of curious what Sarah thinks about this, but I think that to me, like Zuckerberg's willingness to take feedback and listen to data about Instagram will ultimately be judged in the context of this transformation that he's trying to lead Facebook through, where he's moving from broadcast platforms to more intimate messaging style applications. So you have messaging, you have stories, which is a send all type of message, and then you have groups. And, I'm not surprised at the people inside Instagram. And I know there was like a lot of jealousy involved and pettiness, but I'm not surprised that the people inside Instagram would feel bad because they were building toward this broadcast platform and now they're going to be subsumed to the broader Facebook messaging thing. And I think Zuckerberg is right in seeing that we're not going to be interested in doing broadcasts for too long because he has the example of Facebook, which used to be kind of a pretty vibrant place and then dried up. And we'll see. And he probably thinks the same thing will happen to Instagram. So just to weigh in on that. Now on the board.
Wait, can we get Sarah's response to that and then we can go back to my question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I understand that. The problem is we're seeing a lot of action. Like if you look at what's happening on Instagram right now, there are a lot of notifications that send you to Facebook and a lot of ways that they're trying to shape user behavior to redirect the Instagram network onto Facebook. And I don't understand the purpose of that. Like, I got a notification I caught several this week telling me to look on Facebook for a page by somebody who I also follow on Instagram. The reason that these people have Facebook pages is because you're required to have them in order to advertise on Instagram. So their Facebook pages are like ghost towns, and Facebook's redirecting me to them to get updates from those people, but that's not where they're posting. So I think that they're forcing a lot of things to happen, and it's all in the name of creating a mega network across WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger, and Facebook that will, because Zuckerberg believes that the bigger our network is, the more valuable it will be to us and the more stickiness the product will have. I think that there's some maneuvers that seem to be not aligned with that, like rational, logical, disrupt ourselves mentality.
Yeah, I agree that, so I've written about this too, that Facebook tends to put growth metrics in their performance evaluations, and that will lead to all sorts of behavior that is not good for society. And, you would argue that the company doesn't want either. Like, they probably have the page manager on Facebook probably has, some metric they need to hit in terms of active page users, and then puts a notification that does nothing but annoys people. It doesn't even serve the company's broader interests.
Notifications happen at Facebook are some PM needs to goal to a metric, and so he adds notifications. And when you're doing something like that, you're goaling for something that's not necessarily good for your users, and that could hurt the longevity of the business as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so Alex, back to the board feedback. What's gone wrong with feedback about big policy issues question, if Zuckerberg is supposedly so feedback conscious?
Yeah, this is one of the great conundrums about Facebook. They're so good at taking feedback internally. I mean, you have people who sit in orientation, are told that all ideas will be appreciated, and they believe it, and they come up with ideas that have really helped save Facebook in many ways. And Zuckerberg, I mean, you speak with anybody who's been inside the company, they don't always say that Zuckerberg takes what they have to say and acts on it, but they do say that he listens. And that does pervade internally. And I took, in the book, you can see that I took one of Facebook's feedback trainings, and it was pretty interesting to me. And it really showed that they're taught there to give and receive feedback. So that's the inside world. The outside world, I think Facebook kind of broke itself because in this regard, because it kept releasing products like, for instance, the newsfeed, and everybody would, the public protested, and they would say catastrophe each time. I was in one of those groups that was like, 50,000 people against the newsfeed, and 50,000 was a lot back in the day when that was happening. Probably around the time when you wrote your book, actually.
It was a little before, but yes.
Yeah.
That's a great anecdote. Yeah, the whole story of the newsfeed.
Yeah. And then they said,
actually,
no.
That's right when I met Zuckerberg. Was that exactly? That was 2006. That was fall of 2006. Yeah.
I was I couldn't believe the fact that they would roll something, like many people in the public. I couldn't believe that they would roll something out like that. And, I'd never seen anything like that before, because we were all like, we were all discreetly flirting with each other on each other's walls. And then all of a sudden it became, public for everyone to see, and everyone freaked out, thinking, no, this can't work. What are they thinking? And it was just one of a number of freakouts that we'd have. Like, for instance, when they split out Messenger, I don't think, everyone's reacted to Messenger pretty negatively. What, you're making us use a separate app to send Facebook messages? And through each one of these, product changes that they've made with internal feedback, the external feedback was extremely negative. They pushed through, and they ended up being right more than they were wrong. And unfortunately for Facebook, that's caused this disregard for outside feedback in general. And I think so with the board, for instance, they view these people as outsiders. It also doesn't help that Zuckerberg is the king there and has all the voting shares. And they view people as outsiders, and almost as if, like, the people saying you need to be more concerned about privacy, you need to worry about manipulation of your platform, you need to run your business differently. If they're not inside Facebook, they're just not taken with the same amount of credibility as they would be if they were taken inside. And I actually do put in the book that if they start listening to outside feedback and take it almost as seriously as they do inside, they'd be in a lot better place.
Yeah. It's very tempting to spend all of our time on Facebook, and we definitely will spend more time on it, and Instagram. But Alex, I want to go I guess maybe the big reason I feel in reading your book that you wrote it was that you want other companies to react to this and take a lesson that they really urgently incorporate. Have you gotten a kind of response since publishing the book that suggests that people are taking it that way? And just quickly talk about how badly do you see that as needed in the modern, economy, and what's been the reaction?
Yeah, so I think that this is badly needed. That is the reason why I wrote the book. I mean, I've worked in the companies, I'm sure a lot of people out there have worked in these traditional companies where you're told, everybody comes into their job with all this creativity and energy. Everyone who has started a new job sort of remembers this. Oh, we could do this and we can do that. And they spot places where the company could be stronger and deficiencies in process. And we're naturally creative and we want to improve. We're naturally inventive. And why do so many people inside companies just sort of end up falling into their own, into their own tasks, realizing they don't bring ideas? Because it's a top behavior, right, inside the company, where once you bring your ideas to people enough times and they say, no, you're here to do this small task, you're not going to do that anymore. And then we wonder why we have these 5 companies who do this, like who take feedback and make room for ideas fairly well. We wonder why they're dominating the economy and everybody else is falling behind. To me, a big portion of that is culture. And so, yeah, it is my hope that I didn't write it for the tech giants. This isn't for them or for their recruits. I wrote it for everybody else in the economy, and I have been heartened with the response so far. Like, we haven't had a bulk buy from Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, or Microsoft. We have had them from startups, media companies, and even people that work with the government. So the more that these systems can get in there, the more inventive and effective they can be. And I think the better off we'll be as a society.
Good. And I will say there's a lot of great stories about the tech giants in there in any case. Sarah, one of the things that sort of cries out to me from your book, and that frankly, I read it in part to try to understand, is, we are living in a moment where there are a lot of calls to break up the tech giants, to go back and undo acquisitions, particularly the Instagram acquisition, but even things as crazy as far back as Google's acquisition of DoubleClick. And in a way, I read your book as an argument in favor of breaking Instagram back out of Facebook. Whether it could be possible or not is another matter, but you seem to really explain that they did buy it because they saw it as a threat. And once they had it, they really didn't care what happened to it so long as it didn't threaten them. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that that's absolutely true, that Facebook purchased Instagram as a competitive hedge, and there was no lack of transparency about that internally. They knew that they were bad at mobile. They knew that they were bad at photography, and Instagram was something that was catching on. And more so than just those categories of catching on, it was that Instagram was another social network that was rapidly getting a network effect and rapidly taking attention away from Facebook. And over time, Zuckerberg one of the things that's very visionary about him, he looks far into the future. He can see what's going to happen there. And before anyone else recognized Instagram's threat to Facebook, he did. And people thought it was crazy that he was purchasing this company for $1 billion before Facebook was even public. And it worked out extremely well. But when Instagram joined Facebook, the number one clue that this was not just about like preserving this network is the growth team. The first thing they did is they said, listen, we would love to help you grow. Unfortunately, we cannot do that until we figure out if people posting photos on Instagram will make them less likely to post photos on Facebook. So let's just run that quick study and see what we find. To me, that was crazy. The fact that they'd agreed to spend $1 billion on something, and then once it was part of their company, they were like, okay, well, mission accomplished. We got you guys off the market. So let's see if we want to keep you. It was an indicator that that was the true motivation. And we can see now the consequences of Facebook deciding that Instagram is a secondary priority, or that they don't really care about its longevity as much as Facebook's longevity, because Instagram is now a platform that serves more than 1 billion people. We don't have updated user numbers because Facebook's not going to announce them. That was as of 2018. and it has its own problems, and it has its own threats, and it also has a large group of people who depend on it to solve them. But if Facebook is not thinking of it that way, I think that that is bad for society. And I don't think that we're going to see a breakup. I just think that that's unrealistic. But what I think that governments might do or might consider is,
or should do?
that
Are you saying this is what they should do?
Well, I don't know that I want to advocate for a particular policy, because I don't know what's possible legally.
Sorry to interrupt, but continue what they might do then.
What they might do is, or this is a theory I've heard thrown around, is that they would be able to decombine the data between Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Messenger. I don't think that they can disentangle the products as easily, especially because as long as the government is waiting to take any action, Facebook is more tightly integrating them. Already, the Instagram direct messaging team reports up to the Facebook Messenger team. Already, all of the sort of community operations, all of the policy stuff is happening on the Facebook side. Over time, it's going to become more and more a department of Facebook as opposed to a separate entity within Facebook. So I think the longer they wait, the harder it'll be to do any sort of breakup.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience listeners. You know, Bruce Branfon, who's a longtime techonomist, asks about Adam Mosseri. And it's interesting, and maybe, you know, because you cover Facebook too, Alex, maybe you can weigh in on some of these too, anything that's Facebook-centric, because it's your main beat, right? It's Facebook. Mm-hmm. Did he pick him because he was the most capable, or because he is a nice person? That was the way that Bruce asked the question, which is interesting, because one of the things that I wondered, since Mosseri clearly, even though he's a very tight Zuckerberg ally, was quite sympathetic to Systrom and Krieger, which is one of the reasons they really actually recruited him to be their ally, and were not that unhappy, I guess, if they had to be replaced by somebody, it would be him. You know, I wonder whether his position is a little fragile. But so talk about Adam Mosseri, who's now running Instagram, and how you see that playing out. And any Alex thoughts too.
Very interesting that he's the head of Instagram, not the CEO. So right there, Zuckerberg putting him in his place. You know, Instagram is not a company within a company anymore. It's a product division, and I think that hiring Mosseri for the product role at Instagram was extremely smart on behalf of the founders, because they realized that they didn't have the political capital to deal with Facebook's needs. Like when they would go and ask for things, when they would go and advocate for new product initiatives, they weren't being listened to. And they realized that they needed somebody who was an insider. So I actually, in that way, think that Mosseri can be more effective in some ways. And it's not just Mosseri, but also the COO type leader, the head of operations at Instagram, is formerly a right-hand man of Sheryl, and Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook. So now when Instagram needs something, they don't have to go through the bureaucratic channels as much as these guys can just call up their buddies from their last job and say, hey, can you help me out on this? Like, we really need someone on your team. That said, you know, they're also much more willing to make concessions and say, yeah, you're right. Like, that's a bigger priority. Facebook's a bigger priority. Like, you know, Adam Mosseri was one of the top people agreeing with Zuckerberg that Instagram should use Facebook's central team dealing with they call it the integrity team, the one that deals with the problem. He was like, oh yeah, well, they just have more resources, so why don't we funnel things through them?
Yeah. Well, right. And obviously anyone at that level in Facebook has learned to play the politics very well.
Right. It's an extremely cliquey political place.
It's a very clicky, but you know, I wonder whether Mosseri might be slightly undermined by the way you portray him in the book, because you portray him as very sympathetic to a lot of the arguments that you clearly are sympathetic to, and that Krieger and Systrom were championing throughout the history of the company. But Alex, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on that, or any other observations of anything.
Yeah, I have a thought about Mosseri. So, you'd think that he does make a lot of sense on paper, right? He's a former designer, so he kind of has a eye for the visual, which is pretty important on Instagram. And he also previously led Newsfeed, which is Facebook's most important product. So he definitely has the credentials. The one thing that I would be concerned about, and I don't really know how you filter this out, is a story I can tell about Apple, right? So inside Apple, they wanted to build a self-driving car. I guess they still want to build one. And how did they do it? Well, they took the people who built the iPhone and they said, okay, the iPhone had a nice exterior and impressive software. And they said, oh, a car has a nice exterior and impressive software. So we could just take the lessons of the iPhone and build a self-driving car. And because they were so stuck in this mentality of saying this is going to be the iPhone, they ended up totally messing up the car. For instance, they didn't really know how to think outside their iPhone paradigm. So the iPhone, as you can tell, okay, I'll just tell one quick story. So this one woman that I interview in the book, she was in this hotel room for a meeting or a hotel conference room for a meeting, and she picks up the mug and she feels the mold line on the mug where the handle meets the actual cup. And she goes, well, why didn't the designer of this just take a few more minutes and smooth out that handle? And then her second thought was, fuck you, Steve Jobs. Because in Apple, they had totally imprinted in people's heads that things need to be perfect from a design standpoint. And that's obviously the case with the iPhone. It's really nice to hold and look at. And they tried to apply that to the car as well. So a self-driving car, if everyone's seen one of the test ones rolling around, is ugly as hell, right? There's all these different cameras and sensors on top of it, and it looks like a submarine on wheels. And for Apple, that wasn't acceptable. So they actually had the people, the iPhone folks leading the project, allowed design to embed the sensors into the car, which limited their range of view, right? Because they were inside as opposed to on top. So they had only partial data that they could collect, which made that life hell for the machine learning engineers because they were operating on incomplete information, and you need as much data as you can to make that work. So I do think there's a danger of having someone who is successful in one product then go lead another. And it will really be up to Mosseri whether he's able to adapt and realize that he's dealing with something that's not Facebook, and see if he can, figure out how to lead it into the next era.
Josh, we have some questions that now we actually know how to bring in through audio. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep,
what's
that's
happening?
right.
Please do it. Okay.
Yep. First, we'll go over to Spencer. You should be unmuted now. You should be able to.
And please identify yourself, Spencer.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hey, this is Spencer Ante. Nice to see David and Sarah.
Spencer Ante. Hey,
how are you guys doing?
that's a good Spencer to have. Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Congratulations on your books. That's amazing news. Definitely looking forward to reading both of them. My question relates to this tension around the growth at all costs mentality versus what's good for users. And I wanted to focus my question around children. I'm curious, in particular at Instagram, as well as Facebook, is there any discussion within Facebook or Instagram about, especially with Instagram, about putting in more functionality or features to protect children from adult or inappropriate content? Because as a parent, it seems like there's a pretty shocking lack of attention or care to this issue. And I'm just curious how the company thinks about that and how it relates to this growth versus user experience issue.
Well, that's a good entry to the whole issue of disinformation and distortive, harmful content. And I'd love to get both of you guys to talk about that, specifically answering the question, but maybe even more broadly about all of these companies and how they're going to do on this.
Yeah, I think the issue with so when it comes to child pornography, and Instagram and Facebook are actually better than a lot of the other tech companies at finding and taking that stuff down. They are the top company reporting to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And as they transition to an encrypted model, that may go away because they won't be able to see what people are doing with each other. And I think that that's just one example of how even if they are slightly okay at dealing with the problem, as you mentioned, they are certainly not perfect. at handling predatory behavior on Instagram and Facebook. And they aren't even just starting to get better at age verification, but it's very spotty and not well enforced. As they start to figure out these issues, we're going to go right back to square one once they shift to encryption. Because when they have an encrypted, and I'll take a step back and explain what that means, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to make all of the other messaging products operate like WhatsApp, where it's end-to-end encrypted, and so not even the company can see what people are saying to each other. And the only way that they'll be able to solve problems is by triangulation with their public behavior. So say if somebody is doing something against the rules on Facebook, then they notice that they have a WhatsApp account and they can say, oh, well, you're selling guns on Facebook, we can delete your WhatsApp and enforce it that way. I just think that these conversations with children and this predatory behavior is not happening in the open. And so I think it's going to be very difficult to find it in this future encrypted version of Facebook. And they have acknowledged that that's a trade-off, that's what we're going to get by asking for privacy, is that we're going to have less enforcement of all of these issues. And was actually one of the top reasons why Chris Cox, formerly the head of product at Facebook, quit after 13 years, because he didn't believe that this was the right move.
Yeah, I'd say, Spencer, that was generally a no to your question, but Alex, what would you say about this?
I mean, I think that these companies are going to struggle. I mean, Facebook in particular is going to struggle with content moderation its entire existence. And I think maybe this COVID experience will show what could happen. You know, right now they're following the WHO guidelines pretty religiously. Like, you can't even say social distancing doesn't help. They'll delete that. So, you know, if anything, that makes the case for regulators to step in and talk to them about what's acceptable and what's not. And then they just are the ones that execute it. So I think that they've really struggled with the judgment part, which is why they've been so hands off. And I think that, you know, if society finds a way to help make those judgment decisions a little bit easier, they'll be more hands on. The other thing is that, like, man, it's got to be tough as a parent to give your kid Instagram and cross your fingers and hope they don't find anything else. It's like giving them a web browser, right? They can type anything in. So it's just going to be this weird new parenting responsibility where it's going to be like, all right, what's my kid doing on Instagram? And, you know, there's no history there. So I don't know. I don't envy people in that position. That's a tough one to deal with. Personally, when I have a kid, I will not have social media on their phone. At least through middle of high school or something like that.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. But, you know, it's sort of like, you know, you look at, there's some kids right now, they got all this anxiety issues and, you know, the FOMO, like we've talked about it in BuzzFeed, right? When, you know, cause we do a lot of reporting on teens and, you know, when we were in high school, like you found, you know, the cool kids had a party and you found out you didn't get invited on Monday because they start talking about it and you feel bad for like an afternoon and then you're back to your normal life. Now kids are watching the party go on in real time that they weren't invited to on stories. And that's much harder. So I don't know. I mean, hopefully our behaviors will become better because this is all so new. But yeah, I would not have my kids on social media, at least for a while, until they know what they're dealing with.
It's a pretty perilous landscape that society has to find some better solution to, and it's scary that both of you are relatively pessimistic. Josh, we have another question, I believe.
Yeah, I know we're going to try to wrap at noon. We have 7 more minutes. We're going to try to get in 2 quick questions. We're going to start with Mihir. Are you there, Mihir?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. David, Josh, great job on Techonomy webinars. I love them. Alex,
identify yourself, Mihir. Tell us what you do.
Yeah, I'm Mihir Parikh from Nishit Desai Associates. I'm with a global law firm in California, Palo Alto. So I'm very close to all this. All these big techs are within almost 20 miles from where I am. So it's very interesting. Alex and Sarah, thank you for giving us insight into this big tech's working and thinking. Now, both of you brought up that big tech has gotten bigger by acquiring smaller upcoming technology companies, right? In most cases, they do it for competitive reasons, including getting rid of an emerging competitor before it gets bigger. So how should government and FTC get involved from an antitrust perspective in this kind of acquisition? Because in the past, acquisitions have been revolved around the price to consumer, but here the product is free. So what is your view on that?
Good question, Mihir. Thank you for that.
Okay, I could jump in.
Yeah, jump in.
You know, we just had a Democratic primary where I think a lot of us expected the big tech issue to be bigger than it was. It was essentially taken up by Elizabeth Warren and not discussed very much. And her platform was break big tech up. I don't know how well it was thought out. To me, again, like, I don't know, what I would say is we should have funding of the FTC that allows them to actually make decisions, because right now, Facebook and all the other tech giants aren't afraid of them at all. And in fact, the FTC sort of had to capitulate to Facebook when they did this $5 billion fee. And I think they even admitted that they could have gotten more, but just didn't have the resources to get into a protracted legal battle with Facebook. So for me, what I'm looking for next is maybe a political candidate that says, that has a platform that isn't necessarily break up big tech, but is, hey, I'm going to fund the FTC and allow it to do its job. I mean, what use is having a regulator if they're toothless? So to give them some teeth and at least have them capable of taking action, I think will spark much better behavior in these tech giants than having them know that it's not going to really harm them if they break the rules.
Thanks, Alex. Sarah.
Action from the states. Facebook is under antitrust investigation, not just by the FTC and the DOJ, but by 47 state attorneys general. It's a lot of firepower, but again, it's difficult based on the law that we currently have about how we evaluate what is anti-competitive. And you're right that these products are free. I think we need to start thinking about the cost in a different way. The cost of, if there's a way to look at the societal cost or the stewardship that these companies should be doing that they aren't doing over how they manage not just our data, but also our behavior, like the ways that they line up incentives for their users is not always healthy. And so I think that there has to be a balance. There has to be, like, you don't want a company to be told by the government, like, you can't, your product is not good for us and you must tweak the product, in a way that is too overbearing. There has to be a balance, but I think that there needs to be at least a dose of looking at a new way of thinking of the law. On Instagram, for example, there are millions of businesses and their accounts just get taken down and they have no recourse. There's no customer service for them to call. I get all of these direct messages, I'm sure Alex does too, from people who are like, my livelihood just disappeared because, some AI algorithm removed my account and I can't get it back. Can you help me? I'm like, well, I don't know, actually. I don't know what you can do except for try to find an employee on LinkedIn and get their help. So there are financial costs to the companies having tremendous power and not using it well, or not cleaning up their messes.
Yeah. Let's go for one last question, Josh.
Yep. Sandhu, you should be unmuted now.
Hi. About Apple, and I have felt, and I wonder what he feels, that all the divisions of Apple would be much better off if they were spun into separate companies and be able to operate on their own. They're so diverse. I'm wondering what his opinion is.
Yeah, so I would say, I guess that I missed the beginning. I imagine that was addressed to me. So I would say Apple should do it one of two ways. One is allow these divisions to talk to each other, or two is to give them, make them smaller companies and allow them to do their own thing without having to get approval from the top. And it's actually an interesting suggestion because at the end of the Apple chapter, I do sit with Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, and that was one of the things that he brought up as in terms of his suggestions. Maybe you make Apple into a bunch of smaller companies, and that's the way that they should operate. It would be better than what they have now, that's for sure.
Well, that was a nice question to end on because it could be answered succinctly, and we can be on time. I will say, regarding what Alex said about politicians understanding this stuff, I was intrigued to see that our close friend Techonomy of Andrew Yang is now potentially going to run for mayor of New York. Josh, we didn't even discuss that.
Yeah.
And if he didn't, I could easily see him in a Biden administration, if there is one, as a very influential player on these matters, because he really understands the industry and he has probably a view that's not dissimilar to everyone on this conversation. I also just was looking at my notes of questions I wanted to ask, and I had one I wanted to get Sarah to talk about, where she says at one point that, you know, at Facebook, they've changed from thinking about Instagram people to Instagram numbers, basically, you know, thinking about numbers, not people. And the key thing that's going to reform these companies and keep them from harming society is to be people-centric. And I'm afraid at Facebook in particular, which of course I wrote a book about and I followed closely too, they really don't do that anymore. They are just all about growth, numbers, influence, and there's a lot of hypocrisy. So it's kind of tragic. But anyway, I would just say thank you to both of you. We could have gone on so much longer, so many great things to say. Your books are both fantastic, and I mean it. And I really strongly urge everyone to read them both. I learned immense amounts from both of them. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Alex.